Case debate, I want to reflect on the truancy argument that any risk of nuclear war means that you should default negative. This only proves the tenuity of your disadvantage and also the danger of your political logic. Our Coviello evidence indicates that the risk of nuclear war is an ever-present one that the state will always constantly flirt with it for the sake of maintaining control over its internal population and also visiting violence upon queerness. This just proves that you should be supremely suspicious of all of their linked claims, as well as an impact calculus argument. You should default to the affirmative insofar as we believe that all our impacts are systemic and certain, and also that they are all conditioned upon the very externalization of violence that the negative political logic heralds. Go to the legitimacy DA. He says that democracy promotion is inevitable. This is the stupid argument because it means one of two things: either A, your impacts are not unique to the affirmative because democracy promotion will occur inevitably. Your constitutionalism arguments are directly refuted by the piece of Zizek evidence that will extend as the 2AC number 1 on the counterplate. Or B, sub point is that all of our impacts are your form of democracy promotion is the unique form that links to all of our impacts because it is precisely the kind of democracy promotion that denies that the law has any sort of obscene underbelly. That is, again, the Zizek evidence will be on the counterplate. As if that our argument to preserve democracy without constitution. This could not be further from the case. Our Zizek evidence indicates that the law is not simply a written law, i.e. a constitution that restrains private violence, but rather the law is only one mode of private communal relations, meaning that all of those that do not directly answer to the law are deemed necessary in order to give the law any sort of substance, meaning that ritual transgressions of the law are necessary in order for the law to have any meaning in the first place, meaning the constitutions do not prevent democracies from waging war upon themselves or other countries. This will be proven on the empiricism debate that I will get to in just a minute. He says that his impacts outweigh. Group this debate. This impact debate will be ultimately where you decide. This impact debate is ultimately a question of what kind of person that you want to be. We believe that the status quo depends upon the identification and elimination of persistent negativity. If this is the case, then you should ask yourself the question: why is it worth preserving if they win only a probabilistic claim about international chaos post the plan? Remember that there is no extinction impact extended to the Committee Army. You should do no work for him. Our Coviello evidence indicates that this is precisely the image of nuclear war that is conjured up and circulated in political discourses for the sake of controlling the internal population of the state, and also for the sake of identifying all those people that pose a threat to the international order, controlling and eliminating them. This ultimately means that it is precisely the political trope of the negative that justifies in advance the elimination of queerness, but it also means that it is the identification and elimination of queerness which is what provides us with the foundational logic for nuclear war. That's an argument that I'll make in a minute. He says that his diamond evidence is a round winner. Your diamond evidence is absolutely fucking terrible. All of your arguments about accountability are disproven by immediate experience. You live in the United States, which you know for yourself to be experiencing and engaging in multiple levels of war on multiple fronts across the globe. He says that genocides only occur in non-democratic countries. Again, I'll call bullshit. The United States was founded on genocide and continues to visit these sorts of violent foreign policies across the global places like Tora Bora, which do not register on the negative geopolitical map, which brings me to the Christian debate. I'll extend that now. Their idea of democracy sanitizes the concept and the state of the violence that it enacts and causes because it does not consider acts of violence against non-statist entities to be acts of war. This is proven by cross-examination, wherein he denies that what is happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, what happened in Central America in the 80s, etc., are wars. These are only extended military operations. This is a distinction without a difference, but it is precisely this distinction that justifies visiting violence upon people because they do not belong to any sovereign state. Again, there is only a risk of violence in a world of the negative political trope because it is precisely when we suppose that the state is the necessary arbiter of all political violence that the state becomes that entity which is capable of visiting violence upon the population that do not belong in its idealized picture tomorrow. He says that scenario planning is good and that it's key to prevent nuclear war. We control the internal links of nuclear war. A subpoint is that it is only because we have decided that the targets do not belong in our idealized image of the future that we would ever deploy nuclear weapons in the first place. In a world where we disavowed our claim to the future, we would never presume that we have any sort of monopoly over chronology, meaning that we would never hope to enact a future void of those things that we identify as threatening in the status quo. B subpoint is our Coviello evidence indicates that the state will constantly flirt with nuclear war in order to maintain internal cohesion. This means that there is only a risk of accidental miscalc or something of that nature in a world of the negative political logic because the state has to maintain the possibility of nuclear war simply in order to legitimize its own internal political control. He says that there is no alternative democracy. Look, we have enunciated an alternative socio-political organization. Certainly we have not given it a name like socialism, communism, or authoritarianism, but it is not the sort of democracy that they lay claim to. It is a sort of democratic organization where we do not consider the future to be the end-all be-all of politics, but rather concern ourselves with making life livable in the present. If we win any of these arguments, it means that you should default to the radical risk that the plan takes. That will be contextualized in the block evidence on the counterplay, which is where I am now. Go. I will listen to 2AC number 1. This is our Zizek evidence. The law is not simply what is a written code, but is also a mode of communal relations to private rituals. This is why the civil rights legislation did not prevent the KKK from lynching newly empowered blacks in the 60s and 70s. This means that if the counterplan maintains any sort of participation in the communal ideology of reproductive futurism, which it does by virtue of the net benefit, that it sustains the law's underbelly, meaning that private acts of violence against queerness, like Matthew Shepard, will abound in a world of the negative, as will private obstacles to abortion, like gangs of protesters outside of the clinic, etc. This is a 100% solvency deficit to the counterplan, and it is also unique to the counterplan because the plan does not participate in that sort of ideology of reproductive futurism, but rather directly refutes it, which they have conceded as per random evidence is capable of aborting the continued replication of the status quo, which is attended by figures of queerness in need of extermination. He says that equal protection solves social norms. This is empirically disproven. Equal protection is precisely the sort of written code that was handed down in the 1960s, which only authorized and necessitated private acts of transgression against those sort of political norms in order to sustain communal relations, meaning that only in a world where you forfeit a concern for the future and pledge yourself against it, like that, which is affirmed by the affirmative, do we offer any hope of escaping those forms of ritual violence. He said that the permutation links to legitimacy. I'm not going for the permutation, but I will accept block evidence that indicates that it is only when you disavow concern for what might happen and take the radical risk in initiating the sort of progressive political change that you deem necessary that politics takes on any sort of real meaning or responsibility. The political trope of the negative is one that authorizes status quo violence for the sake of a future that they can't guarantee.